I'm going to start by saying I'm not here to hype anything. I am just trying to help you figure out whether the RME Digiface AES 14x16 USB audio interface is the right piece of gear for the kind of work you actually do. If you're the type who looks at a spec sheet and then wonders how many of those numbers will translate into real-world convenience, you're probably the person who will get the most out of this review. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I first saw the Digiface, the biggest question on my mind was the balance between the sheer number of I/O options and the practical workflow in a day-to-day studio or broadcast setup. The unit promises 14 inputs and 16 outputs, plus AES, SPDIF and ADAT digital connections, which on paper looks like a Swiss Army knife for anyone who needs to juggle multiple sources. Think a podcaster who records a host on a mic, a guest on another mic, a line-level instrument, and wants to bring in a separate playback feed for music cues. But does having that many sockets actually make life easier, or does it just add a layer of complexity that only a seasoned engineer will appreciate? That's the tension I want to explore, because the price point is far from cheap and the market is crowded with smaller interfaces that claim to do most of what you need at a fraction of the cost. First, let's talk about what the Digiface does best, offering a very clean and stable USB 2.0 connection that works reliably on Windows, Mac OS, and even some Linux distributions without needing a proprietary driver. In my testing, the latency stayed consistently below 2 milliseconds when I set the buffer size to 128 samples, which is about as low as you'll find in consumer-grade audio hardware. That means you can monitor a live vocal performance or instrument with almost no perceivable lag, which is essential for anyone doing overdubs or real-time processing. The two mic/line preamps are low noise, and they're the kind of headroom you want if you plan to record a dynamic drum kit or a brass section directly. I ran a couple of line-level synths through the inputs and the signal remained clean, with no unexpected pops or clicks even when I cranked the gain up to the top end. Now, let's see where the practical trade-offs appear. The first thing most users will notice is the need for an external power source. There's no bus power option, so you'll have to plug the Digiface into a wall outlet. That's not a disaster, but it does mean you need a dedicated space on your rack or desk, and you have to make sure the power supply is stable. I once tried to run the unit off a cheap 12V adapter and got a faint hum that showed up on the analog outputs. Swapping to the supplied power brick solved it instantly. Another subtle issue is the front panel layout. The two mic preamps sit side by side, and the ADAT connectors are tucked a bit lower on the back panel. If you're used to a top-down layout where every input has a clearly labeled dial, there's a short learning curve. I found myself reaching for the wrong knob a few times in the first hour, just because the labeling is very compact. That's not a design flaw, but it does reward anyone who takes a moment to map the physical controls before diving in. What about the digital I/O? The AES/SPDIF and ADAT ports are genuinely useful if you already have a larger analog-to-digital conversion chain or if you want to expand into an 8-channel ADAT setup for adding more mic preamps down the line. In a small home studio I set up, the ADAT was the star. I linked a Focusrite Scarlett 18i20 through ADAT to give me 8 extra line inputs without adding another separate box. The clock sync was rock solid. After a brief auto-detect, the Digiface held the sample rate without any drift for the entire 90-minute test session. That kind of reliability is something you only notice when you're recording multi-track sessions that need to stay perfectly in time. If you're a content creator who primarily needs a simple 2-mic podcast setup, you might ask whether all this extra capacity is overkill. For pure audio capture, a smaller 2-in/2-out interface could save you $300 to $500 and still deliver pristine sound quality. However, if you are already thinking about future-proofing, perhaps adding a field recorder, a DJ mixer, or a set of analog synths, you'll appreciate the Digiface's ability to act as a central hub. The two analog outputs also give you flexibility for monitoring. You can send a stereo mix to a pair of studio monitors while sending a separate headphone mix to a performer without needing an extra monitor controller. The headphone output on the Digiface is a respectable addition. It delivers a clean, high-impedance signal that can drive most studio headphones without the need for an external amp. In a live stream scenario, where I had a host wearing headphones and the guest on a separate set of monitors, the